The story as we know it is that a loving cat owner by the name of John Arbuckle spoils his orange cat known as Garfield, a lazy cat that loves lasagna. Garfield is known to hate Mondays, which is a common complaint amongst many workers who work a 9-to-5 job, as Monday is the first day of the week, being back to work after a weekend of relaxation. But it doesn't make much sense why Garfield would hate it, as he doesn't go to work, but it's been theorized and speculated that it's a reminder of a repetitive life to him, feeling as if he is trapped in a never-ending, boring and tiring cycle, with no end or excitement, something that he hates greatly. In the story, the unknown protagonist approaches a house where he meets Garfield at the porch, actually telling this unknown stranger that he has lost his keys, seemingly being locked out, hoping the stranger would help Garfield find them to find his way back inside. There is no sign of John anywhere, which is a little odd as he is the owner and typically takes care of Garfield. The protagonist aimlessly looking around for the key, not questioning anything, finding himself in a surreal neighborhood where this isolated house is only present. He manages to find a remote control for the garage's door, which he assumes to help Garfield as he is locked out and wants to find a way in. But strangely, as soon as he opens the garage's door, Garfield rushes towards him, shouting and screaming no, with a glimpse of John being seen, throwing what seems like a knife towards the protagonist, with the protagonist's vision going dark when everything resets and the protagonist witnesses a big change, with Garfield leaning on the door and everything being back to normal. Of course, this depicts that something has hold of the protagonist, hence why he is not questioning anything and obeys the orders of Garfield, this orange cat-looking like entity who simply orders the protagonist around with new chores. Looking around for another way in, the protagonist finds the hatch door, which he opens with Garfield suddenly pushing him down into the dark basement, ordering the protagonist yet again to do something even more bizarre. He explains that his master has drawn strange sigils on the walls which need to be covered by a spray can. The symbols seem satanic at first, as if used to perform some sort of ritual, with Garfield specially referring to someone as his master. Might at first seem like he is referring to John, but it bears a more sinister and eerie message that something horrible is going on here. The protagonist yet again doesn't question the hostile attitude of Garfield of why he pushed him down and why he needs him to do such chores, and mindlessly does as he asks. While covering all the sigils, the protagonist finds a notebook inside a small cage with what seems to be drawings, depicting that inside the house is safe, while the outside is a dream, something that seems to be illusioned and real, designed to manipulate the victims. The drawings further explain the cat is evil and should be avoided, illustrating the cat to be a demonic, dangerous being. Of course, this seems to refer to Garfield being evil and not the typical cute, harmless cat we know of. The notebook drawings also include a code which the protagonist uses to open a safe which has a relic. Garfield from the walkie-talkie instructs the protagonist to take the relic and hide, as his master, John, is coming out, implying that John is behind it all, being the evil master manipulator. Evading John and going up, the protagonist finds tally markings on the wall, depicting how someone has been counting the days of being seemingly trapped inside, further strengthening the theory that the victim was thrown in the cage as well, being confined to inside of the house. The house seeming like a rundown abandoned place, he goes to the bathroom to see large words completing a sentence that someone is not the master, depicting that the person who has been referred to as the master is not the master at all, with the bathroom mirror being punched in, shattered, displaying possibly John has been manipulated in believing he is the master and in fact he is nothing but a puppet victim. Garfield then orders the protagonist to throw the relic into the burning oven, which instantly transforms the house and the environment into a fun, cozy and homey place than the abandoned and dilapidated house which clearly had imprisoned someone. This reveals Garfield is probably behind it all, controlling the psyche of the protagonist or John, which they try to overcome by a ritual using the sigils and the relic, breaking the illusion which Garfield ordered someone to get rid of so he can regain control. It seems as if John is the one being controlled, hence why he tried to go to the basement and stop the protagonist. Garfield also manipulates someone else to do his bidding, as it seems the ritual and sigil stopped him from stepping into the house. With the sigils covered and the relic destroyed, Garfield is back home, relaxing on a chair, telling the protagonist to put his toys away, which might indicate the protagonist is just a child. After completing his chores, Garfield orders the protagonist to go outside and find out what the dog has buried. Using a shovel and doing so, the protagonist finds the dog hopping and jumping at the background in a gleeful manner, but as soon as the site is dug up, the protagonist comes across the bloodied remains of the dog, with the happy jumping dog in the background transforming into a deformed Garfield, telling the protagonist that he burned the lasagna, with the entire house being up in flames. This clearly reveals something severely sinister had happened here, with the dog being murdered and the house burned, with a newspaper reporting on the tragedy of a family seemingly being targeted, with Garfield presumably being the culprit. That's when the protagonist blacks out, finding himself inside a car, parking up in front of what seems to be a different house in the woods. This time around, the protagonist seems to be different. Someone like an adult. Strangely, the protagonist has the relic with him, with the time being seemingly 1 month before. A voice orders the protagonist to go around and investigate this house, which has a can of gasoline in front of it, with the protagonist pleading with the voice to what is happening to him and what he has done, depicting he blacks out often and does certain things, sinister things which he is not happy about, as if he is controlled by a powerful entity to commit atrocities. The voice explains this is going to be their new home, not expanding on how they arrived here and who owns the place. The protagonist not happy with what the voice is answering, he resists the voice, saying that he is not willing to do what it wants, when he blacks out with a piercing sharp sound giving him a paralyzing headache, when he finds himself in front of the bathroom mirror, seeing his mouth bloodied and being with no clothes, finding his tongue in the sink. The protagonist is revealed in here to be John, who blacks out again with the mirror being smashed, so his sense of identity is taken away from him, with the sentence, "I am not the master," being written on the wall by John, with the voice explaining that this is the master and the one in control, and John is nothing but a tool by the voice to be controlled. His tongue was taken away from him as a symbolic reminder John shouldn't talk back and question the voice and must do as the voice demands, depicting that Garfield has been the master all along, with John being simply a tool who has been trying desperately to escape the grasp of John. John, unable to speak, knowing he is doomed to be a puppet and left with no other choice but to obey a demonic entity, follows the orders of this being, who only reveals each step at a time of the tasks that he needs to complete. He orders him to get in the car and to drive to a location. As he arrives to a house occupied by people, he orders him to cut the phone line. As soon as he does so, the property's dog starts barking, noticing that an intruder has infiltrated the property, which the voice accordingly orders to silence. Of course, this is quite clear where it's going, with the voice being a sinister presence who enjoys killing for the thrill. And now John follows his orders, knowing if he doesn't do so, he would simply black out and his buddy would do it anyway. It is not clear if at the moment he is aware of the events taking place or not. Just as John silences the poor dog, the child in the house jumps out of sleep, hearing several gunshots, which terrifies him. The perspective changing to the victim now, the child in a panic, overcome by fear, hides in the closet, but it doesn't take long before John opens the closet and finds the child, with his hands being bloodied, implying where the sound of the gunshots came from, with John killing the child's parents and the dog, kidnapping the child and then eventually burning the house. This reveals who the protagonist was all along in the first part of the game, with the child being the one trapped in the house, being the one who was placed in a small animal cage, drawing pictures of how the cat is evil and how the inside is safe compared to the outside world. The hallucinations hunting and tormenting the child also revealed the trauma that he endured, with his dog being murdered and his house burned with the corpses of his parents inside. The child then awakens in the cage that we saw in the basement, with John observing him, not uttering a word as he is mute now, crying and weeping in response to the child when he confronts him to why he is trapping him there. John is clearly suffering and hates himself because of what he is forced to do, but he knows he has no other choice. In the meantime, the child gets fed, which seems to be spiked food, which transports him to a dreamy world which he sees symbols in. Eventually, after some time, maybe weeks passing, the child sees an embodiment of the surreal orange cat letting him out through the hatch door, asking if he wants to play with firepower, while the world outside is vibrant and welcoming, clearly being visual and mental manipulations by this entity who has already possessed John. The child is then handed over a fire device which allows fireballs to be thrown when he gets instructed to go through a green maze and shoot the lasagna entities. As he does so and shoots at a few, the veil of his illusion is broken, with the child seeing how he is in a gas station having killed actual humans who were seen as lasagna pieces, with the gas station scene as a maze. That's when he is prompted to jump in a car waiting for him, which seems to be driven by John. So it is clear now why the drawings in the cage were mentioning the cat is evil and a monster, and inside is safer than the outside, as the evil being manipulates and disguises certain sinister and deadly tasks as fun and harmless chores, making his puppets do evil deeds for him. The child seems to eventually realize the outside world as an illusion, with the actions that he is forced to commit being brutal, murdering actual people. The child being the new puppet to the evil entity embodied as Garfield, he soon gets instructed to visit the garage, which seems to be off limit to him, a place he cannot access, which turns out to be the secret operation place for John, who has been studying the ancient methods of Egyptians to overcome evil possessing entities. Hence why he stole an artifact from a museum and drew all the symbols all over the walls to protect himself against this entity and loosen his grips. As it turns out, these symbols and the relic prevent Garfield from accessing those places, hence explaining why he ordered the child to burn the relic and cover the symbols in the first act of the story. That's when Garfield is seen in fury blaze interrogating the child to what John is hiding from him, but he takes shelter inside the garage. The child soon comes across a note seemingly written by John, who explains that it all comes from a voice, a hostile evil voice which has been possessing and controlling him to do evil things and hurt people, creating an illusion to disguise the brutal reality they are forced to live through. John explains as the child is being controlled now, with the voice in his head having the embodiment of the cat when they are possessed, it cannot control John any longer, who never wanted to hurt anyone. He continues that he has found a way to destroy the voice, but they have to wait till the end of the month, as the stars would align then, which in a way suggests that this voice is a powerful ancient presence which has been there since the beginning of times, which even the ancient Egyptians dealt with, creating a ritual to destroy. John instructs the child to stay inside and never listen to the voice, no matter what it says, and to listen to music to keep the voice out until they manage to destroy him. The world and life seeming like a dream for the child now, phasing in and out, blacking out constantly, waking up at times weeks after a small moment of awareness. He eventually has his full awareness, seeing how the house has changed with symbols all over the walls, which are the only protection that they have against the voice. As both the child and John have committed atrocities, he knows better to stay in, as the authorities are on the hunt for them, who is also trying to find a way to not only destroy this evil controlling entity, but to also evade a punishment from the enraged victims and the authorities that they do not deserve. It's clear John has been trying to protect the child and himself from this evil voice, all before the eventual event we experience in the first act. That's when the kid starts drawing what John tells him to stay in, and he is forced to keep him inside the cage at times when he is overtaken by the entity. But despite that, the entity is too powerful, appearing on the TV and telling him to go out and play, saying how John is not to be trusted as he was the one killing his parents and dog, and he was the one waiting in the car for him at the gas station, playing tricks on him, which leads to the child going out again, back in the dreamy world where where he shoots at some bats, which in reality is killing more innocent people, when he is suddenly intercepted by John, whom the entity portrays as a huge monster. That's when he is back in the cage with John explaining how sorry he is for all of this, but that's the only way that he can protect others and the child. John in fact really cares for the child, as he was in the same shoes experiencing what he is. But the experiences for both were different. For John, this entity was simply a hostile and controlling voice which had no embodiment and controlled John through fear and pain and blackouts. But for the child, it is shown as a cartoony cat in a vibrant cartoony world, being adapted to each victim's specific way of thinking. As time goes by, with John looking after the child, telling him to listen to music whenever he hears the voice, to put a blindfold on when he sees the kitty, and to be in timeout, or in other words, in the cage if he is overtaken by the kitty starts appearing less and less, with the child starting to feel resentful against John, and missing the kitty, who portrays itself as the good person, manipulating a child who is easy to lie to. That's when the child wants to see the kitty again, thinking that he is the friend, as he portrays a brutal world where he kills people as playing fun games, and he sees John, a responsible adult who is trying to protect others and the child, as the unfun, evil person. The child wanting to play with Garfield leads to the current events, being the first act where he covers the symbols and burns the relic, trying to evade John. That's when he sees the cartoony world again, shooting at bats, when John, in a desperate attempt trying to stop the child, is left with no other choice but to shoot him in order to incapacitate him. Crying, knowing this was the only way he could stop the child and this evil entity, he carefully puts a sheet over the child, bidding him farewell and going back up to endure this entity for one last day before he can perform the ritual and get rid of him for once and all. Just then, when he goes back up to the living room, the voice speaks to John once again, explaining how his efforts of getting rid of him are all pointless, as he has unshackled the entity through killing the child, his vessel whom he was trapped in. He further explains he is so powerful that he can take away even the stars, creating a black hole, saying how he is powerful enough to make the child appear again, despite having died, when all of a sudden John breaks, with the entire world resetting. This time around, the protagonist approaches Garfield again, who asks the protagonist to find his keys and let him back in, which in a way might portray that the entity is so powerful that he managed to reset the time and put John and the child in a never-ending loop. Or if a new child was targeted to come to the house and work closely with John, a reluctant servant of the god entity, who despite trying to fight, never wins. It's possible even the same child was revived by this entity, given life to come back to the house again. The calendar also passing 31st of October with hundreds of tally markings shown in the beginning portrays how John never managed to get rid of the voice, and they continued to go through this hellish cycle over and over again, never to be freed and to always be under the control of this entity. And that is it for this video, folks. What are your thoughts and opinions? Let me know down in the comment section below. As always, it's been your host Star, and I will see you on the next one. Have a fantastic day.